What is it that drives a young man into a frenzy of murder and revenge? This is the stuff of drama for centuries. Think Hamlet or Poor Romeo. In this case, we feature a young man at the seaside who is driven into just such a frenzy, and it costs the lives of two entirely innocent people. This week, we are in the eminently respectable south coast seaside town of Bournemouth. In fact, in one of its more fashionable suburbs, Southbourne, where the grand avenues lead down to the sea and the famous 7 miles of sandy beaches. The product of this eminently genteel city on the coast is a young man called Lee Baker. He was brought up there, in and out of care.
He was taken into care when he was a baby. At an early age, he had a very fixation on death and particularly decapitation. For some reason, at a very early age, he was exposed to horror comics and other reading material that distorted his thinking and his mind. He was desensitized at an age when he wasn't mature enough to cope with what he was watching and reading, and it clearly made him into a psychotic character as he grew into a teenager.
He was a very gifted artist, and we recovered from his home address pen and ink drawings of his school and mass murder taking place, in which the students and the teachers were being killed, and also graphic pen and ink drawings on a Conan the Barbarian theme, where heroic warriors are slicing into other people with double-handed swords and axes, that kind of thing. But it was particularly graphic and sick, one has got to say. It seemed that he revelled in violence and gratuitous violence. He'd immersed himself with these evil thoughts, really.
It was something that was hidden within him as a sadistic trait. It was something that he didn't just contemplate or draw about. It was something that he felt he wanted to enact. And he did have, if you like, the psychological constitution to do so.
He drew bodies without heads. He drew heads without bodies. An extraordinary preoccupation, you might say, for a young man. But then he was really troubled. Nevertheless, at about the age of 16, he met a girl called Goode. They were about the same age, and Baker was hypnotised by her.
Young Lee Baker was one of these men who was very insecure as far as women were concerned. At least that's my opinion. And he found a girl that he really, really fell for.
Everything seemed to be going swimmingly. He was no particular petty criminal. He didn't have a life of crime. But what he was deeply disturbed. It may not have been apparent on the surface, but it was certainly going on underneath.
They were a couple, they went out together, they drank together, but it was clear that one or two people picked up on other signs in the relationship. One or two people said he certainly had a temper. Caroline herself would reveal that he was fairly controlling. She had a very good friend, Helen, who she saw a lot of, and he became a bit annoyed about that relationship and wanted her to spend less time with Helen. He found that a bit annoying. He would have very dark moments, and she said that he would cut himself. He would cut his wrists and his arms to draw blood, and on occasion had talked about suicide as well.
At the age of 19, Caroline decided to break up with Lee Baker. In April 1986, they parted. It was to prove a catastrophic decision for Caroline and her family. But they could never have guessed what would happen.
Some people can handle emotion and rejection in a relationships, but some people have expectations of getting something more from the relationship that the other party cannot give. Not taking into consideration the other person may not be able to handle that rejection. They just cannot handle it. They lose their rag and they'll go crazy.
The relationship ended when the violence bubbled over. I mean, he'd been drinking and was at her house, I think, when he punched her and broke her nose.
You know, break your girlfriend's nose as an incidental product of a small argument. This is someone who would resort to violence, and someone who had, it would appear, a kind of explosive, perhaps slightly borderline character, whose temper was completely unrestrained and knew no limits.
It's very hard to stay together in the wake of such an injury, and it was certainly one reason why her parents didn't want her to have anything to do with Lee Baker.